This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is George Schaller. He was born on July 9th, 1924. He served in the Pacific during World War II. He achieved the rank of Yeoman second class. We're recording this on June 19th, 2015. I'm Will Hines and conducting this interview. No relation. So Mr. Schaller, can you kind of talk about growing up you grew up in Ohio, correct? Newark. And so you probably grew up during the Depression. So what effect did that have on you as, or your family?
I didn't know any different. I mean, that's the way it was. I don't know how to answer it really.
Well, so could you tell that, life was different than it normally would be, or was it just?
It was different than it was now. But back then we didn't know any different. I mean, that's the way things were.
Did you live on a farm or?
A city boy, no farm.
Okay. What did your father do?
He was a factory worker for a stove company, Newark Stove Company.
And
my mother cleaned houses.
And so did you lived in a city and you went to schooling throughout
12 years of city schools.
12 years of city schools. And so you decided to enlist.
Yeah, they were starting to get close to drafting, and a friend and I decided we'd get out and enlist in the Navy.
And what made you decide the Navy instead of the Army or Marines? Did you?
Well, I don't like bugs, and I could see me crawling through the weeds on my belly someplace, and I'd meet a spider or something, I'd probably stand up and get my head shot off. So I figured I'd rather swim for it than do that. And in the Navy, you had, most generally, you had 3 square meals a day and a dry bed. If it wasn't dry, you were in trouble.
So, did you go somewhere to enlist, or did you just go down to?
Well, I went down to the draft board, I guess it was. I don't remember where I went.
You and your friend. And so you enlist, and do you have a week or two, and then you're shipped off to training, or?
I don't know how long we had anymore. Don't remember that. But we were shipped off to Great Lakes, and we were in Great Lakes about a week and being examined over and everything. And he turned up with tuberculosis and went home. Was in the TB hospital for 4 years, and I was in the Navy for 3. So I don't know. Which had the worst sentence, but I saw him several times since I got home. He died a few years ago. But
so you did training at the Great Lakes?
Yeah.
And what did that consist of?
Cleaning floors and making beds and little drill work, some rifle shooting. Not really. I don't think a whole lot.
But do you have to go through basic when you're in the Navy?
Yeah.
So you go through a lot of rifle work and that kind of stuff just to
pass the time, I guess, because we never carried a rifle. Didn't fight hand-to-cannon combat or anything like that.
So you went from the Great Lakes after, you said, 3 months of training or so?
Yeah. Then I went to San Francisco on a troop train. It took us about a week to get out there. They pulled the shades. We couldn't see where we were at. People couldn't see us. And back then, everything was secret. Where today, anything goes. And then I went to Pearl Harbor, Honolulu, or Hawaii, Pearl Harbor.
Could you see the remnants of the battle and what happened there?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. Later, I got to go on what's the monument out there? The Oklahoma? No.
The Arizona.
Arizona. But no, it was. You could see some of it. You couldn't see it all because you cleaned up some, but there were some things you could see. The ship's still there. And when I walked down the dock and saw that ship sitting there, I said, they'll never float. All that steel's not going to float, because it had sides on it, that armor on it that thick. But it did. Worked real well. I spent, from then, let's see, from April of 43 until February of 45, was basically on the ship, just patrolling around the South Pacific, bombarding different islands, Japanese islands.
So you were on a heavy cruiser.
Yeah.
And what is the purpose of a heavy cruiser? Can you kind of describe what your purpose was?
It's one step below a battleship. It's that big. It was a big ship. One step below the battleship. And they just used it mainly for bombarding and whatever else they needed it for, I guess. But
what was your job on the ship?
Yeoman.
Okay.
Started out seaman, and then I got into yeoman third class.
And can you describe what a yeoman would do?
Office work. I was in the construction office where we kept records of the different repairs and things that were made aboard ship, and I was also in the I think they called it administration. I forget what they called it. But, we handed out passes and personnel records and that sort of thing.
And how was the living situation? Did you share bunks and your face was this close to the next bunk, or?
Well, being a yeoman, we had a small office. It was two desks wide, set like this up against the wall. Then there was another desk back on the other wall this way. There was one bunk right above that desk, and then there's another bunk up far. I was lucky. I had an air vent at my head and the one on my feet coming in both ways. We had a good life aboard ship. It was good, interesting. It had ice cream twice a week, and the food was good, I guess.
It was bearable.
About like it is here.
Did you have to? Don't put that on Facebook.
Yes, it won't go on Facebook.
Did you have to bathe in salt water, or was it fresh water?
I think it was fresh water. I can't really remember. Sometimes it'd be salt water, but it wasn't very often. I remember one time I just got in the shower, and you'd get wet, and then you'd lather up, and then you'd rinse off to save water. And I got all lathered up, and the GQ bell ran off, and I had to go to general quarters all lathered up with soap head to foot. So, because when the general quarters went off, you went to your station. Wherever you were at, you went to your station right away. And it was an interesting life. I enjoyed it. I'd go up and about in the evening and watch the sunset when I could. Nice and quiet. You wouldn't think there was a war on, but it was quiet.
So you ship out of San Francisco and go to Hawaii, and that's where you get on your ship?
Yeah, Honolulu.
In Honolulu. And so...
Pearl Harbor.
And from Honolulu, Pearl Harbor, you went to what island?
Oh, I don't remember what island we went to. We just went out on different places. Marshall, the Gilberts, Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Saipan, Tinian was the other island close to Saipan, I think.
And so each of these islands you would get there and bombard them for 3 days straight or whatever?
Oh, I don't know how long we'd bombard them. I don't remember how long we bombarded them.
How loud was it?
It was loud.
Yeah.
I think they were 10, 12-inch guns. And when they'd shoot broadside, all 10 of them at the same time, the ship would go so many feet sideways from the recoil, which was amazing to me too, because I didn't know how I could move it that much weight that far. Mm-hmm. But they had a lot of recoil, I guess. And we just go in and bombard them a while and go back to some place and anchor for a few days.
And would you hear about reports of the battles that would take place on the islands?
No. Mm-hmm. We did. I don't know whether the officers did or not, but we did. Mm-hmm. On one island, I can't remember which one it was, they had a subnet up at the front of it. There was an atoll, and they had a subnet up, and when we went out, they said it was a 2-man Jap sub went in when we were going out. And then after we got out and got out of quarters, general quarters, we could look back and see the smoke where they hit a ship in that atoll. It's a submarine torpedoed it. Mm. And
did you run into many subs? I mean, did you ever have to fire depth charges? And
well, we didn't have depth charges.
Okay.
We just maneuvered.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was one time that we had torpedoes fired at us, but they missed. Although before I got aboard ship, it was someplace down towards Australia. I can't think of the name now, where it did get torpedoed, and that's the reason it came back to Pearl Harbor for refitting and.
Your ship got torpedoed?
Yeah, repairs, and then I went aboard ship to replace people. But
so you're going throughout the Pacific, going to each of these islands. Did anything interesting happen at some of the early islands that you were on, or that you were outside of? Any stories that kind of pop up in your mind? Nothing
happened. No. One of the islands. We could go ashore for liberty. We were given 3 bottles of Coke and 3 bottles of beer, 3 cans of beer. Mm-hmm. And the ones that liked beer would trade their Coke for the ones that didn't like beer, for their beer, trade us, and we had to get more beer. But I found out that a buddy of mine from home was on one of the battleships. I can't tell you which one now. And I had to signal it and see if he was on board, and he was, and when he was going to be on the island. And we made arrangements and met, got together on the island for a day, visited. But,
do you know what island it was? Do you
remember? I can't remember. No. Too many islands, too long ago.
Too many islands. Yes, sir.
But
did you ever see any kamikaze attacks?
I don't know whether they were kamikazes or not. We had Zeros attack us, a Japanese plane, and we shot down several. And we had 2 seaplanes, one on each side of the ship, mm-hmm. for observation. And I guess they had a gun or something, because they said that one of those shot down a Zero one time. I don't know how true it was, but I can't visualize them shooting down a Zero, but mm-hmm. they said they did, so I guess they got credit for it.
So when you went to your battle station, where did you go?
Well, when I was first started, I was on a 20mm gun sight as a loader. Mm-hmm. And then that's when I was a seaman. Then when I made Yeoman, I was a phone talker, which would be standing beside an officer with a phone, earphones, headphones, and if he wanted to relay to somebody a message, well, I'd have to relay it to him.
Hmm. So were you able to see some of these Zero attacks on your ship?
No. At that point, I was down below the water line on in secondary bridge control or something. It wasn't until later. I don't know how much later, but at Iwo Jima was when I was outside, and that's when I got injured. But,
and can you kind of tell that story? So you're at Iwo, bombarding, and then
it was 2 days before the invasion. We were softening up the island again, but I heard stories that you'd never soften it up because the
volcanic ash.
Well, no, they had tunnels and I'm trying to think of what they called them, where they had caves.
The cave system all throughout under the island.
Yeah, and they had heard it at I think it was the south end of the island. There was a cliff that had the caves, and they said they had guns emplacements in there. So our job was to get them to fire and shoot them or knock them out. So we went in and stopped dead in the water. Well, of course, we set and duck. And they shot, as I remember, 2 shells went over. And our ship started up, and the next 10 shells raked our ship, front to back as we went through the bombardment. There's about 145, I think, fellas killed, and 200 and some wounded. I was one that was wounded, and several of my buddies were wounded. And my commander, the fellow I worked for, he was standing right beside me. He got killed. And of course, a lot of others were all over the place.
So what happened? I mean, what do you remember happening?
When I got hit? Like getting hit in the chest with a 2x4. As hard as somebody could swing it. The shrapnel went through 3 inches of kapok, my May West jacket, into my liver, severed my common bile duct, stuck there, big gallbladder, messed it up. That was 2 days before the invasion. I spent a couple of days on the ship because they were landing, we couldn't get a hospital ship in. Finally they did, so they put us in I want to call it a Higgins boat, a little big bathtub like thing. And they had probably a dozen or 15 of us wounded down on the bottom. And it started getting dark, so the hospital ship left. And it left us out there in the ocean in this little bathtub all night.
While you were wounded?
Yeah, they were transferring us from the Pensacola to the hospital ship. And it had to leave, and it came back the next morning and picked us up. But I remember that night, you could see the tracers going back and forth on the island. And I never cared for fireworks since then. So, but I got on the hospital ship, and they took us to Saipan. We were there for I don't know how long. And from Saipan, we went to Honolulu or Pearl Harbor, Aiea, I think it was. And then finally to Oakland, California. And then they sent me to Philadelphia to be discharged 14 months later.
Did you have surgery after being hit with shrapnel?
I had many surgeries. Yeah. I had, of course, they had surgery to remove the shrapnel, and then for the abscesses formed, they had to operate grade nose. I had 3 or 4 major surgeries there, and I got addicted to morphine, and it was in my record, which I got later, that they gave me sterile water for a shot of morphine with the same effect. But
So when you were hit, I mean, could you feel the pain? Were you numb? Was it, you know?
it's just like somebody hitting you with a 2x4 knocking the wind out of you. Right then, there's no pain.
Right.
It just kind of took my breath away for a minute.
And then how long, or, I mean, you probably don't remember this specific amount of time, but do you think you're laying there for an hour before you get assistance, or because your ship was probably pretty torn up from that?
No, it wasn't too bad. It was bad enough. It could maneuver under its own power.
Mm-hmm.
Because
So did a corpsman come by and try to fix you up, or?
well, as soon as they could get to me, they did. They had a couple hundred wounded there, and they had to take care of them. They were taking care of the worst ones first, or I assume they did.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't too long, I don't think, because my commander was dead. A fellow I knew, he got wounded. The smokestack, I remember the smokestack went up and it had a scoop on the back, just a metal scoop, so the wind would take the fumes up away from the rest of the ship. And that thing looked like a sieve from the shrapnel.
Were you thrown, you know, back against a wall, or?
Not as far, I don't remember that. No, I don't think so. I was probably just laid down on the deck. I wasn't thrown back or anything like that, no.
And so you spent the next night in a Higgins boat?
It was a couple of days later, after that was 2 days before the invasion, and I think it was probably a day or two later when they could get things organized and get the hospital ship, you know, and make arrangements and all that kind of stuff. Because they knew they couldn't take care of me there aboard ship. They didn't have the facilities. And
So how was being on the hospital ship? I mean, did it just feel like time just slowly dragged by, because you were probably on there for a long time?
I don't remember much about the hospital ship. I can't even tell you the name of it. It was long as it took to get from Iwo Jima, I think, to Saipan, probably. However long, that's how long it was on there. Probably a couple of days. It's an experience you wouldn't take $1 million for, but it's an experience you wouldn't want to do again either. But in the hospitals, we had fun in the hospitals. When we were up in wheelchairs, we'd race from, get a couple of guys racing up in the ward there up back.
I'm sure the doctors and nurses didn't like that.
No, well, I don't know, they didn't care. And we'd play cribbage all day. Somebody'd set in. And I think it was in Hawaii when I came back there. I had no appetite, and I went from about 170 pounds down to 80 pounds. And the doctor came in one day, and he's standing there at the foot of my bed, and he said, "Do you like spirits?" I said, "Spirits? You mean like beer, whiskey?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I like a cold beer." So part of my medication while I was in that area was 3 bottles of beer a day. And anytime I wanted a beer, I'd just tell the nurse, "Hey, I'd like to have a beer."
So you could keep calories on and
Help me build up my appetite, I guess, and fatten me up a little bit. But and I couldn't drink a whole beer myself. At that time, I couldn't drink a whole beer. So they had movies, and if I wanted to go to a movie, why, basically all I did was click my fingers like that, there'd be 2 or 3 Marines or somebody there that could move, put me in a wheelchair and take me to the movies, because they got what beer I couldn't drink. That was one of the better. I think that was Hawaii.
And so you go through major surgeries. Did you go through any in Hawaii while you were there? Go through a...
Hawaii is where they operated first, I think. Saipan, they didn't operate. They couldn't operate. And then they transferred me to Hawaii. And they operated there and took the shrapnel out. And patched me up as well as they could. And as soon as they could, they transferred me to Oakland, California, where they had better facilities. And that's where I spent most of the time. I don't know how long it was, but I know I had a private room with 3 nurses a day, 8-hour shifts, for quite a while.
Yeah.
And they had good doctors. The doctors were good, and everybody seemed to know what they were doing and everything. And there's several incidents that were funny, but I can't tell you about them. Things that happened in the hospital.
You can tell me.
Yeah, but it's going on record. I don't want it on the record.
I'm pretty sure I've had veterans say worse.
Well, I'll tell you about one of them. There are 2 that you can talk about. It was in Oklahoma. No, not Oklahoma. IE, Hawaii. They had me in a private room. And I had to use a bed pad. So it turned the light on, which supposedly would call the nurse or the corpsman or somebody. Nobody came. Just couldn't hold it any longer, basically. So you can't stop Mother Nature. And I turned the light off. About 5 minutes while Corman came in, and he says, did you want something? I said, well, I did want a bed pad. I said, now I want a clean bed. He lifts the sheet up, and he just went into a tirade. He said, I'm going to tell the doctor. I said, you go get the doctor and I'll tell him. And that's the last I heard of that. I got my clean bed. Yeah. We had fun. Had to.
Yeah. I guess you had to get some joy out of, try to find some happiness in there.
Yeah. They had me sitting in the bed in an upright position, where you raise your knees up and you're sitting there. And I was so long in that position that my feet went down like, the toes went down like that, what they call a foot drop. And when they got me up the first time, I was standing up on my toes like a toe dancer. And that didn't hurt. And they said I'd never walk again. But my mother came out there, that was in Oakland. And my girlfriend and my future wife came out to visit me they were about to visit, and they stayed about 6 months. And my mother would come in every day and rub my feet with cocoa butter and maneuver or massage them, so forth, and work them. And that's why I'm walking today. Hadn't been for her, I wouldn't be walking.
Well, my mom uses coconut oil for everything as well, so.
That's the only thing I ever really used it for. But
wow.
They felt like they were asleep and I couldn't stand the sheet on them. And when she started rubbing them, oh, that was terrible. Hurt like the devil.
But it worked.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you spent You spent a long time in hospitals then until you were discharged?
14 months.
Oh.
From February of 45 to April of 46. I went from, I was on Saipan, Pearl Harbor, Oakland, and Philadelphia, four hospitals.
And so once you're ready to be discharged, are you finally able to walk again and in better health than you previously were?
In better health?
Mm-hmm.
No, I wasn't any better health because I just spent 14 months in the hospital.
Right.
Yeah. And I really never have been the same since.
Mm.
But that's neither here nor there.
So you were discharged and you went back home to Ohio?
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do from then?
Well, first thing I did was get married. I've often thought I should have stayed in the Navy and put my 20 in, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But now we got married. I tried going to college, and that didn't work, so I got a job and raised a family. Then after I started working, I decided to go to night school. It took me 10 years. I was awful dumb. I finally made it. Other than that, well, that's about it.
Well, Mr. Schaller, I really appreciate your service and let me interview you, sir.
Thank you. I hope it's some help.